I'm a 19-year-old female living in the Pacific Northwest. A couple of months ago, I was looking for extra work because my hours at my regular job were terrible. I'm quiet, anxious, and don't have any friends, so, of course, I turned to Craigslist. I knew the site could be sketchy, but I was desperate for side gigs and hadn't had any luck as someone with no skills and not willing to do OnlyFans. One ad caught my attention. It offered $50 for someone to take photos of a property using either a camera or something above an iPhone 12. I have an iPhone 14, promising that it would only take an hour or two. I emailed the poster and soon got a text back, and the man said that I seemed like the perfect fit and invited me over that same day. What's funny is I actually made a post on r/tooafraidtoask asking if it was a dumb idea, and everyone told me to take a person with me. I didn't, and deleted that post shortly after. The house was about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by dense forests. It was small and run down, but nothing really raised alarms, and the man who greeted me looked like he was maybe in his mid-50s, unremarkable. He invited me inside, and the house was completely empty. No furniture, just dust and dirt. I asked where to start taking photos, but he kept dodging the question, making small talk and asking personal questions about me instead. My anxiety was building, so I kept the small talk going, but then he began staring at me intensely. I dropped my phone at one point when we eventually started taking photos throughout the house, and when he picked it up, he held on to it a little too long before giving it back. Unprompted, while taking photos of the master bedroom, he brushed my face with his hand and complimented my skin. I knew it was stupid coming here, but at that point, my blood truly ran cold, and I was done making excuses in my head. I made a quick excuse to leave, something about my mom, but when I turned toward the door, he grabbed my arm. I still have the picture that I took after the ordeal of the bruises on my forearm, and it felt like it was going to get snapped in half. I had brought a small knife for self-defense, a gift from my paranoid mom who would have never have let me come here if she had known. And without thinking, I pulled it out and stabbed him in the arm. It was released with a push of a small button, and he let go, swinging at my arm with the knife, but I already was running out of the house. I got into my car and drove until I reached the gas station, and my heart was calm. I called the police and explained everything. They did take it seriously, and I came in to make a report and answer some questions. They searched that property in the surrounding forest, but didn't find him, and the house had turned out to be abandoned, and in the basement, they found a pack of zip ties. A report was made, but I know he's still out there. I call sometimes for updates, but it's never anything of substance. I've never told anyone about this other than the police, not even my mom. And I know typing this I sound pretty unbothered, but that was the first time anything like that has ever happened to me, and I have trouble leaving my house most days. I decided to type this out here as maybe a way of getting it off my chest, since it plagues my thoughts constantly. So this happened just last week. I live alone in a small college town, although I'm not a student or a faculty member. My apartment is in a duplex on a residential street just a few blocks from campus, which most of the students have left for their winter break. Things get very quiet when they're not around. Late Wednesday night, I woke up to a disturbing sound outside. It was someone crying, but not in a normal way. This was more like delirious wailing. The person didn't sound grief-stricken or panicked, and there were no cries for help. Otherwise, I'd probably have gone outside cautiously to check things out. And this sounded more like someone doing an impression of a ghost, but being a little too convincing. A sort of woo, ooh, ah, over and over. Not a pleasant way to wake up, I'll be honest. I got up and looked out the window but didn't see anyone, and I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. After a few minutes, the wailing grew distant and things got quiet. I went back to sleep, a little unsettled. Thursday night rolled around and I went to bed as usual, wondering if I'd hear anything again. And sure enough, I was awakened a few hours later, but this time the sound was completely different. At first I wondered if there had been a heavy snowfall because I heard what sounded like the edge of a shovel scraping the sidewalk. It was very rhythmic. 2 plodding footsteps followed by a long and drawn-out scraping. Thud, thud, scrape, thud, thud, scrape. I got up and looked out the window, where I saw no snow but a dense fog and a woman across the street. It took me a minute to tell if she was wearing some strange hat, but then I realized that the hat was her hair. It was long, down to her waist, and completely filthy and matted, bunched up into a single mass that looked like a gigantic glistening hairball. The woman was standing with her shoulders hunched forward and her arms crossed behind her back like a figure skater or dancer. And she was doing an unusual sort of dance, where she would take 2 heavy stomps and then glide as if though she were on ice skates. But there was no ice. I couldn't tell how she was gliding so gracefully and effortlessly across the pavement. It was almost hypnotic to watch because she appeared to be elderly and frail. But she could spin, glide, and maintain balance on a level that would be hard for me to keep up with. And each time she would glide, I'd hear the scrape sound of her shoe against the pavement. There was no additional steps to the dance, just the rhythmic stomp, stomp, glide, headed in one direction before twirling around and doing the same steps in the other. After a few minutes, she stopped and then stooped down like a runner at the starting line, dramatically leaning forward with her fingertips lightly touching the ground. She stayed that way for a good minute or two, and it was a very unsettling thing to see in the shadows and fog. Then she slowly stood up, turned facing away from me, and got up on her very tiptoes with her long, skinny arms outstretched. Then she broke into a rapid tiptoeing motion that professional ballerinas do. In my mind, I heard that classic cartoon sound effect that plays when a character scampers away. And without a sound, she danced into the fog, and I haven't seen or heard anything from her since. This happened to me many years ago. I am 38 now, and I believe this took place when I was 14 or 15. My family, consisting of myself, my mother, and my brother, who is 6 years my junior, were in the process of moving down the road sometime in the near future and had been fixing the new place up so it was move-in ready for us. We had enlisted some help from some extended family, mainly my mother's cousin and her adult sons and their wives, to help paint our bedrooms. During one of these days of hard work, we collectively decided that we all wanted Slurpees from a nearby 7-Eleven store. And for those that don't know, a Slurpee is a frozen drink, usually soda flavors, dispensed from a machine with a handle that you push down or pull up on. The cups come with a clear dome lid and a long straw with a spoon on the end. And maybe it's just me, but the spoon is pretty useless. The best part is, since you get to prepare it yourself, you can mix any of the dozen or so flavors yourself in any order you'd like. So one of my older cousins and I decided to head out to get the drinks while the others continued to work in the house. The drive there and the preparing of the frozen beverages were both uneventful within themselves, but what I do remember is walking back outside and hearing a woman screaming something like, "Help me," to my left. I turned my head only to witness a middle-aged man wrestling the keys away from an older woman. She was maybe in her 60s. I froze and just watched the scene play out in front of me. The man did manage to snatch the keys away from the lady and hopped inside her car, backing it up and taking off with it. The problem was, the lady had somehow fallen and landed with her legs under the car, so when he backed up over her. The police were called, of course, and my cousin and I stayed to give our statements, and I managed to memorize the license plate to the stolen car, which came in handy when the lady was so in shock she couldn't remember it herself. I was always told growing up to get the plate number if there was ever an emergency involving a car, and so I did just that. I remember hearing later that the car was found about 30 miles or about 48 kilometers away from where it was stolen. I'm not sure what happened to the lady, the man, or the car, and since this was the early 2000s, I highly doubt that there would be any information online this long after. That 7-Eleven has since closed and become a few different businesses, the most current being a cell phone store, but anytime I venture past that place, I always think back to that event that I witnessed many years ago. This story takes place in November of 2017, and I was 18. I'm a very short girl, only about 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way that suggests they might not like me. So needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. My friend and I were out shopping. It was something we'd do maybe every few months just to bond since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. And she's just like me, barely scraping 5'1" and very non-confrontational. It's probably why we became friends. On every shopping trip we would find ourselves in Ann Summers. We're both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere, and Ann Summers always had great sales, so we grabbed the cheap bras while we could. This shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers, but that's when things took a bit of a turn. I'd barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me, and her finger jammed into my chest. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. Assuming that she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. It should have been obvious to me at the time. No salesperson would ever behave like that, not one that wanted to keep their job anyways. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes that she wouldn't notice me again, and she didn't, and I thought I was in the clear. My friend and I browsed the shop, trying to avoid the woman, but the shop wasn't very big, probably only 15 feet by 18 feet, so eventually I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. I was looking at the price tags but realized that I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. It's important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans, and you'd think that she'd maybe had a child in this pushchair. But no, it was full of plastic carrier bags. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double-bagged and tied shut. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. This sense of protection became very relevant because when I leaned over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair. I was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently it was too close. The woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around to it where I was stood. She hits me in the face. It was somewhere between a slap and a punch, and I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. All I knew is that it hurt. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear, and I apologized to her. This woman just hit me and I apologized to her. I regret it now, but at the time I didn't want to provoke her any further, not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. And in my shock, I turned around and ran to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. I stood there holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, "She just hit me," to my friend, and we stood there for a good minute in silence, and my friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. "She's gone," my friend told me, and I let out a breath that I didn't even know that I was holding. "Can we stay here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The front of the store was open, but she could have easily just been a couple of feet down the road and out of sight, waiting for me to leave. My friend agreed, and we slowly browsed the shop again. About 5 minutes later, we got to the counter to check out, and the girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. That woman's been in here for 30 minutes. I didn't know what to do." She told the two of us, "What did she say to you?" "She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in, and then she hit me because I was too close to her." "She hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. "If I'd have known that, I would have called security. I'm so sorry." I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She didn't look much older than I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. And still shaken up, my friend and I made our way out of the store. I looked around but didn't see the woman. "Can we just go home now?" I asked my friend. We hadn't finished browsing all the shops, but I was so paranoid that we bumped into that insane woman again. She agreed, and we got the bus home. And when I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police, and I called the non-emergency line, and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" And unless I went back to the Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had, they wouldn't do anything. It's been just over 3 years, and now I'm sure that that woman was likely to have been homeless and/or on drugs. It's the only explanation I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or maybe even both. This happened a while ago, 2015-ish, but I'll probably never forget it. I was around 21 at the time. I'm female and still fairly new to the city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship, wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know many people in town besides my ex and his friends. I was on a dating/hookup app looking for people to hang out with casually, maybe find a friends with benefits or something. I matched with a 25-year-old guy named Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days, and he told me he was in a band and lived in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music, just an audio track on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments, and one of them looked like him. The music was an odd mix of styles and not really my thing, but whatever. He seemed like a nice enough guy. After a few days, he stopped replying, and I figured that was that and moved on. Then, one day at work, I got a message from him apologizing for being busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He had mentioned that their band manager provided the house to them to live in, and given the lack of views on their YouTube video and the fact that I had only seen one photo of him playing in the band, I figured he was probably exaggerating. I assumed it was more likely a bar manager friend gave them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band or something, and I didn't think much of it beyond that. Normally, I wouldn't have agreed to go to a barbecue alone in a stranger's house, but I was really bored and figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety, maybe even make some female friends since he made it sound like a big party. I looked up the neighborhood that he gave me, and it was a suburban area with lots of families. I figured being in a yard on a nice summer day wouldn't be overly risky because there would be plenty of neighbors outside. Plus, it was just a few train stops away from my workplace, and I was off in a few hours. I told him I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea since I didn't know him well, but I'd stop by for a bit as long as I didn't have to go inside the house. He assured me that was totally fine, which made me feel better. I even avoided drinking anything for the rest of my shift so I wouldn't have to use the bathroom and risk going inside. Since he had implied the event was already underway, I was anxious about just showing up. Plus, I knew finding a specific address from the backyard side would be kind of tricky, so I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station since he said it was a quick walk. He agreed, and I let him know when I was leaving work and what time my train would arrive at his station. Now, red flag number 1, when I got to the train station at around 5:30 p.m., I looked around but couldn't find him. I messaged him and he said he was running behind and told me to start walking toward the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I finally spotted him wandering toward me. I recognized his clothes, bell-bottoms, not common, especially for men at the time, and long hair. But up close, his face looked noticeably different from his photos. Maybe it was heavy-duty editing, or maybe he used pictures of his brother or something, I don't even know. But he looked older, not 25, more like 35. And this was the first real red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just self-conscious. Maybe he smoked a lot and never wore sunscreen. Maybe he just hadn't taken new pictures in a while. And besides, I was mostly there to make friends, so I told myself not to judge. Oh, and he was already very drunk. But a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem strange. He was hosting a barbecue with friends, after all. The second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he assured me that we just had to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard. We would have had to backtrack to the main road to go down the alley directly to the backyard, and I figured he just forgot what I said about not wanting to go inside and didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I just sort of went with it. We got into the house and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and knob behind me. I didn't think that was too weird, since nobody was hanging out inside and a lot of people were just in the habit of locking the door when they come in, but it did still give me the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then Simon told me that he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just there for the barbecue, and he said that he and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house and was really proud of it. At that point, I was getting really skeptical because usually when guys would tell me things that seemed a bit far-fetched, they'd let the truth slip by the time they got me in their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in a stupid house anyways, and he insisted to be quick. Not the wisest choice again, I know. But I was pretty good at explaining away red flags, so at this point, Simon still mostly had a dopey stoner art guy kind of vibe as far as I was concerned. He didn't really seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who sucks at communicating and fibs a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotionally and verbally abusive, but it never escalated past that. I figured at worst, he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at that time, obviously, so once again, I just went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully, other than the decor in the common area was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast and not a bunch of guys in a band or their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse. On one hand, he was clearly lying, but on the other, it made me think it was probably just someone's mom's house and she was out of town and didn't want to tell me that he lived at a friend's parents' home and didn't actually have a paying job. Again, total red flag, but I could rationalize it at the time. The bedroom doors were all closed, bathroom was unremarkable, and he then showed me the kitchen and I finally saw through the window that there was nobody in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around. No burgers thawing on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around, nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue, and he told me that his bandmates were still on tour, and they were just running behind due to van trouble, but they should be back any minute so we could start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them, if he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was to that because it didn't make any sense. And at this point, I'm out of mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of crap, and I'm really freaked out. It took me long enough. I'm smarter now, don't worry. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation, though. I hoped that once he was done with the tour, we could go outside, even just for a minute, and I'd just leave. I've been in some sketchy situations in the past, but luckily, nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't comfortable doing it inside the house. I knew this guy was full of crap, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. I instinctively pretended to believe his nonsense. He offered me a beer and I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He said okay and cracked one open for himself. He then wanted to take the tour downstairs, and I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind with really small windows, so right there, thankfully I refused. I asked if we could go back outside, and he said after the tour. I tried to argue about going into the basement and told him I had a spider phobia, didn't like basements, etc. All lies, but anything to keep him from realizing that he was what I was afraid of. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured it would be better to just let him show me the damn basement and then hopefully we could go outside because I really didn't know what else to do. And the basement was fairly unremarkable. Couch, TV, elliptical, until I noticed something else that gave me chills. The house was probably built in the 1990s or late 80s at the absolute earliest, but I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house, the kind that only opens from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges, and it looked really out of place in this house. I absolutely would not go anywhere near that door. He opened it and told me it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away, and it did look soundproof. It was about the size of a bedroom, and I could see a few guitars and amps in it. Mattress toppers on the walls, no drum kit or recording equipment that I could see, though, and he insisted that I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door, motioning for me to go inside. And my God, the alarm bells were really going off now. At this point, I realized that I could actually die here if I wasn't careful. I turned around and ran up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking what was wrong, acting like I was being unreasonable for not wanting to see his soundproof music studio. And that's when I realized this was way sketchier of a situation than any of my ex's nonsense, and I was freaked out. At that point, my main objective was getting out of this house. The front and back doors were both closed and locked, so I tried to run. He'd be able to get to me before I could get the locks open. The bathroom didn't have a window. The house had a convoluted floor plan that I wasn't familiar with, and he was much bigger than I was. He was the tall, lanky type, someone who could run fast even if they were out of shape and smoked a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit, and we made small talk for a few minutes. He cracked another beer, and thankfully he calmed down, and I desperately mentioned, yet again, that it was beautiful outside and suggested that we go sit in the yard while we waited. He said no and started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I'd really like to smoke a cigarette. He told me that we could smoke inside and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. God damn it. We sat down at the table and lit some cigarettes, and as he was smoking, he started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as his cig was done. He offered me some, and I said no thanks. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff I could. I'm a pretty seasoned weed smoker, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him that I was a novice, that was more than enough for me. And for a liar himself, he thankfully wasn't very good at picking up on the lies of others. And after we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates got back. I told him that I was really looking forward to spending the day outside and suggested that we go for a walk or visit the park, ideas he did not like or appreciate. At this point, I was just trying to keep as much distance as possible between us, but he stayed close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath. He grabbed me by the waist, and I backed away. I asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject, to make him think that I still believed what he was telling me. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any minute. My anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I tried to calm him down again with very generic small talk. And now I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. At this point, he was getting even more pissed off than before, so I went out on a limb and suggested that we go get more beer for the party, because I was out of ideas. I was terrified that suggesting once again that we leave the house would enrage him even more, but I had to try. And thankfully, though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I might actually be down to drink with him, and he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this menace in this weirdly desolate suburb. But I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. When we got to the store, I told him that I didn't need to go inside if he was just grabbing beer, and he insisted that I had to go in. At that point, I was so stressed and frazzled that I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. Inside, he asked what kind of beer I wanted, and I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink too much, and he demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I just named the first one that came to mind. We went to pay, and the cashier was kind of an a-hole, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have, but I panicked. I regretted it, but I also remembered the times my ex told people that I was crazy so they wouldn't take me seriously, and this liquor store guy definitely seemed like he'd fall for that. I had one last idea before I took my chances running. There was a drugstore across from the liquor store. I told Simon that I had to buy a toothbrush, something that vaguely implied that I might stay over, and he eagerly agreed but tried to follow me inside. I told him that you can't bring beer into a drugstore. I have no idea if that's true, I doubt it's a law, but this drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. And now my naive self thought maybe I could just wander around long enough and he'd get the hint or leave. But no. Half an hour later, he was still standing there staring through the window. I ended up hovering near the tills, waiting for a big group of friendly-looking people, and when they left, I followed them out and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly, and loudly enough to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting into the car, who were now pausing and staring at us, and then he just turned around and left. Bizarrely anticlimactic, thank God, and I ran to the train station and never heard from him again. When I got home, his app profile had either blocked me or been deleted. Years later, I wish I had reported him. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again, but made sure that the fridge was stocked first. Back in July of 2018, myself and my 3 best friends decided to go on vacation to Barcelona. The 4 of us, all girls, were 18 at the time and had just finished our freshman year of college. For context, we had planned this trip for several months, but being the lazy asses that we were, we took our time before booking our flights in Airbnb. We eventually started our search in May, and if you've ever been to Barcelona, you might know that's already pretty late if you want to find an affordable and well-located summer accommodation. We ended up scrolling through several websites for days as everything was way out of our budget. One of my friends finally found a very decent studio located near the Rambles, a very touristy neighborhood. The condo was actually located on a narrow street perpendicular to the main Rambla. You had to walk about 500 meters or 0.3 miles to reach the sketchier end of the street where the flat was. It didn't really bother us since the building was pretty secure. You had to open the first front door which led to the street, then you had to take the stairs to the second floor where there was a second door requiring another key. The second door led to 3 condos, so we had a third and final key to our personal flat. And this door had no outside handle, meaning that If we left without our keys, we'd be locked out. Additionally, the balcony door also had no outside handle. You could only open it from the inside. This might seem like a lot of details, but it is important for what comes next. The day we checked in, we were pretty excited despite being utterly exhausted. We had been traveling for 15 hours at that point, so we decided to smoke a cigarette on the balcony. The balcony next to ours belonged to our next-door neighbors, a group of Italian boys that we met at that very moment. They had been pretty loud throughout our stay, but we never thought too much of it. As for the layout of our condo, the front door led directly into the main room where two of my friends were sleeping. The bed was on the left, and at the end of the room was the living room, which also functioned as a kitchen and a bedroom. The sofa was a foldable, where my third friend and I were sleeping. We were there for 5 nights. As the young women that we were, our daily routine was pretty consistent. We would go clubbing every night, get home at around 4 a.m., pass out in our beds, and wake up at 11. We'd visit the city until 7 p.m., then get ready to repeat the cycle. Our first 3 nights were awesome. We had some male friends who were also staying in Barcelona, so we'd meet up with them and it was a lot of fun. But the 4th night was creepy. We got home at 4 a.m., messed around with each other for another hour, and fell asleep by 5. Around 7:30, my friend, who was sleeping with me in the living room and suffers from sleep paralysis, woke up feeling something tickling her ankle. She opened her eyes and saw something crouching at the end of the bed, his hand on her ankle, as if he were looking for something under the bed. At that moment, she was convinced that she was experiencing sleep paralysis again, but the fear made her sit up in bed and shout, "What the F?" which rarely happens with sleep paralysis, as obviously your muscles are usually numb. And her shouting woke me up, and I saw the guy. Standing at the end of the bed and still half asleep, I whispered, "Edward?" I think I had been dreaming about a friend of mine and confused this guy with him, and the guy got startled, suddenly stood up, stared at us, and then just tiptoed away, muttering, "Oops, oops, oops." He walked past the other bed where my friends were still dead asleep and exited through the front door. My friend and I stayed up for a long time talking about what had just happened, and eventually we woke the other girls and told them the story. And we never figured out how this guy broke into our flat. He didn't steal anything, even though we had left our credit cards, IDs, and phones and cash openly displayed on that table. And the only thing was that we didn't lock the front door that night. But it was closed, meaning that normally no one should have been able to open it since it has no handle, unless someone had a key. We chose not to talk to the police about it because we feared they'd blame us for not locking the door properly. We also didn't inform the landlord for the same reason, but also because we didn't want to ruin our last day there. We tried contacting our neighbors, those Italian guys, and went to their flat and knocked, but they never answered the door. Looking back, we definitely should have done something about it, and we shouldn't have stayed there for another minute. But we were too young, I guess. We could never figure out what that guy wanted or what he was looking for touching her ankle like that. None of it made any sense. Why would someone enter an apartment uninvited at 7:30 a.m. while the occupants were asleep just to look for something under the bed? Well, I guess we'll never know. In August of 2023, I was in my junior year at a trade school in Sumeru County for graphic design. A sophomore named James noticed that I wasn't getting dropped off at our home school like he was, and one day he offered to drive me home. I didn't know this kid well. I had spoken to him a few times, but we weren't friends. I told him that my mom prefers to meet people before letting me ride in a random person's car, especially a guy's. At the time, I was 18, so I also mentioned that if he got into a wreck, I would be legally responsible as the adult in the car. And after that, he didn't really bother me much. We still talked occasionally, and it was clear that he wasn't neurotypical, but things didn't get creepy until my senior year. We exchanged numbers because I sometimes helped him with homework that he didn't fully understand, and I also recommended some horror channels on YouTube, like Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that covered disturbing videos such as Hannah the Horrible, Nick Crowley, and Nexpo. And within a month, he somehow found my home address, and I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than I did. The way our homeschool system worked was that all students on the west side of Fontaine heading into Solani went to one middle school and high school, while students from East Fontaine going into Layu went to a different high school. I never told this kid where I lived, not even a rough area, and at this point I started documenting everything, no matter how big or small. Over the next few months, if I fell asleep on the bus, he would tap my headphones, snap them against my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone just to force me to talk to him. And in April, he asked me to prom, and I repeatedly told him that I was not interested. He tried to manipulate me into going, so I ended up lying and saying that I had a family event that day. After that, I reported him to the principal for harassing and shaming people into going to prom, and he gave me the most insincere apology ever. It was clear that he had been forced to do it. The next day, he called me and asked if my sister drove a red car or worked at the Sangonomiya coffee house, and I quickly told him no and blocked his number. I then went to administration, bringing up the fact that this kid had been calling me to ask if I had gone to Dollar General, if I was at work, or if I was at home. He also told me disturbing thoughts about wanting to kill his mom's boyfriend, describing how he wanted to smash his teeth in. He'd smack his phone against the bus window, try to manipulate me into calling him while he was having a panic attack, and rant about how our math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight. He went on a misogynistic rant about how fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies, and she wasn't even overweight due to a poor diet. She had a medical condition that caused a buildup of estrogen. And the worst moment was when he lost his AirPods case and had a full-on meltdown. He aggressively stomped on his AirPods, foamed at the mouth, and threw a tantrum in pure rage. I reported everything to the principal and the school liaison, and instead of listening, they yelled at me for an hour, accusing me of being mean to a kid on the spectrum. I thought that he just played Overwatch. They even justified his actions by saying that my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information were all public anyway. At this point, I started having a panic attack and called my mom, and I was literally vomiting into the trash can in the conference room. My mom was pissed. She told me to call the sheriff's office as soon as I got home. The sheriff actually went to this kid's house and warned him to knock it off, or else I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter later confirmed that what the principal and liaison did was disgusting and dangerous, and so far I haven't seen him and I still have his number blocked. Hopefully I never see that little idiot again. And to James, if by some chance you ever see this post, stay away from me and my sister. I hope your future commanding officer finds out about all of this. Oh, and that's right, this guy wants to join the army. I stupidly decided to get gas at 11 p.m. one night because I hadn't made time before work. As I'm pulling up to the gas station, there are a couple of cars at the pumps, which make me feel somewhat relieved and safer going in. But I was wrong. I go inside to pay the clerk since I'm using cash, and as I'm heading back to the pump to fill up, most of the cars leave, except for one truck parked 2 pumps away from me. I get into my car to wait for the gas to fill and start scrolling on my phone. Suddenly, I see this guy walking suspiciously around the front of my car, and I glance up to see what he's doing. Unfortunately, we make eye contact. He asks if I have any change for gas, and I shake my head. No, sorry. And he responds, "Okay, that's cool. Hey, do you want me to remove your gas pump for you?" And I quickly respond, "I'm good, thanks." At this point, my tank is full, and he knows it, and he acts fidgety and walks away behind my car. I'm trying not to glare back too obviously, but I subtly am looking around trying to figure out where he is. I don't want to make it obvious how terrified I am. In my head, I'm thinking, how do I leave with him still around my car? He's out of sight now, and the lot is empty, and I'm waiting for another car to pull up. 5 minutes pass and nothing. My fight-or-flight response is just kicking my head in, and it's freezing outside, and I haven't started my car yet because the pump is still in. I have no idea where this guy went. Finally, I see him walking towards his truck, but instead of getting in, he's just sort of lingering around it. And the second his back is turned, I go for it. I remove the pump, and as soon as he notices, he quickly starts approaching me again. "Oh, hey, you're really beautiful," he says, still walking toward me. And I nod quickly, but subtly, I put the gas cap back on, and then he says, "I don't look like a serial killer, do I?" With this crazed look in his eyes. Like, yeah, bro, you actually do. And at that point, I bolted to my car and just sped off. As this was several years ago, a 35-year-old blonde, white, petite Italian-American with barely 2-year-old twins. And now I may be biased, but my boy/girl twins are exceptionally cute. Weirdly though, they don't even look related. My son in particular got a lot of attention due to his strawberry blonde hair and giant blue eyes. So I head out to Target with my twinsies, parking slightly far from the main entrance because I like to be close to where you can return the carts, and there weren't a ton of carts in this row. As I'm getting out, another couple who parked near me and I exchange smiles. Clearly their son is the same age as my kids. The dad is a bear of a man, huge with a beard for days and arms like tree trunks. And as I'm walking around Target, looking at all the things we don't need, I vaguely notice two couples who seem to be in a lot of the same areas as me. They aren't speaking English, and if I had to guess, I'd say probably Russian, but I couldn't really tell. Now fast forward, I get in line behind one of the couples. My daughter is in the seat part of the cart, and my son is in the wide open part. And out of nowhere, the woman from the couple behind me is all up in my cart and personal space. Meanwhile, the couple in front of me, after paying, doesn't move out of the way. Weird. Move over, guys. What are you doing? And then, the woman behind me leans completely over my cart, placing herself between me and my son. And I have no idea what she's doing, still. It seems like her main objective is to block my eye line from him. I have my hands on my daughter, but I can't even see my son. She's a big lady, and she is way too close to my kids. She is leaning so far over my cart that her body is practically resting on both sides of it. Again, I can't even see my child anymore, who, up until 2 minutes ago, was less than 10 inches away from me. I asked her to back up when she started inching closer, but she just responded in her native language. I gestured to show her what I meant, and I repeatedly asked her to please move, excuse me, etc. And it was obvious that I was trying to get her away from my children. Even if you don't speak the same language, it's pretty damn clear what I was trying to imply, and she just blatantly ignores me. I'm trying to lean around her to grab my son and throw him onto the conveyor belt just to get him away from this couple. Seriously, what are they trying to do here? And she refuses to move, and I can't get to my son, and this starts to go on for several minutes. We're not even checked out yet because I have items in my cart that I can't reach. I'm also blocked in on the other side by the other couple who are standing completely on top of me. At this point, I am full-on yelling at the woman to get the F away from my kid. Finally, I grab my cart and smash it as hard as I can into her, and she starts yelling at me, and backs up just enough for me to grab my son, who is now hysterical. The 16-year-old cashier was useless, even though I was screaming at her to call security the entire time. Then the bear from earlier sees everything happening and rushes over with his family. He shoves the other couple away from me, and we ditch all my attempted purchases. He escorts me and my twins back to our cars safely, and he and his wife even followed me for a bit onto the highway just to make sure that we weren't being followed. So to the tourists at Target who attempted to... I don't even know what you were attempting. You raised all my mama bear red flags, and you're lucky I didn't smash my keys into your face because that was my next move, coming at you. This happened approximately 10 years ago, around 2015 to 2016. I was living with someone at the time who worked an opposite schedule as me. He worked graveyard shift and I worked during the day, so when I was getting up and getting ready to leave for work, he was just coming home. On the nights during the week, I obviously would be at home by myself, and one night during the week I was feeling especially lonely and my favorite toy unfortunately broke and died, so I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store to buy another one. The town I live in is a mid-sized suburban town filled with mostly residential areas. The main downtown area was essentially one small area on the way to the freeway, and my apartment was 10 minutes away. I pulled into the parking lot behind the adult store. The parking lot was dark and had multiple entries all around that led to the bars and restaurants as well as the store. After parking my car, I walked towards the entrance of the store, which was on the street, and to do so, I had to walk towards the driveway that I came in to park. And upon walking to the entrance, I noticed a man standing by himself smoking a cigarette. It was 1 a.m. and not normal to just see only one person standing by themselves there, though I figured he was one of the patrons from one of the bars on the block taking a cigarette break. And as I walked passing him, he says, "Hi," to which I responded with a very quiet hi. But didn't make eye contact with him, and upon passing him, I had a better look at his appearance. He had a shaved head, wore a long white t-shirt with shorts hanging past his knees, and he had a pair of sneakers accompanied with some tube socks that covered his shins. This is not unusual to see in my town, but I was more concerned that he was sitting by himself and instantly took an interest in me as I walked past him. After passing him and continuing to walk to the store, I saw out of the corner of my eye the man proceeding to follow behind me. When I say follow, I don't mean he coincidentally was walking behind me. He immediately followed right behind me as soon as I passed him, making a point to maintain the same walking speed. I did not know this man's intentions, but a man by himself that late at night is a recipe for trouble. And as I looked down the dark and empty street, I weighed out my options of where to go. Initially, I thought, keep walking so he doesn't know that you're going to the adult store. But since it was 1 a.m. and there was no one on the street, I thought that to be probably more dangerous. Then I thought, just go in one of the bars. But then I thought that would give him an easier introduction to approach me. So then I realized my best bet was to continue into the store where I knew it was well lit and people could see me. I proceeded to shop for what I came there for, and the man entered the store behind me but hung out at the front of the store so as not to look like he was following me around. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He literally just sat at the front waiting. And as I was shopping, I heard the man make sort of a s sound, to which I ignored. And he wasn't getting the message, and he continued to make this S sound as I continued to shop without noticing. And eventually I walked up to the cashier, who was completely oblivious to what was going on, and I tried to whisper to the cashier, "Do you know what that man, or does he work here?" The cashier asked me to repeat what I was saying, and asked again, but still spoke in a quiet voice. Not understanding my attempt to be discreet, the cashier responded, "I can't hear you. Say it again." At this point, I felt like my cover was blown, so in a more normal tone, I told the cashier the man in front followed me from outside and won't leave me alone. I explained my car was parked in the lot behind the store and I didn't feel comfortable going to my car, and the cashier said okay. The cash wrap area was an enclosed square-shaped counter to maintain distance between the staff and the customers. The cashier walked to the front by where the man was, and from behind the counter told the man to leave. He then came up and reassured me that he told the man to go away, though the man did not, in fact, go away. He continued to stay there. Given that I didn't want him to follow me to my car, I stayed in the store and pretended that I was still shopping, even though I had already found what I came for. I would occasionally glance at the front to see if the man was still there, and he was. And I kept going up to the cashier, explaining that the man hadn't left, so he went back up to the front to talk to him. I heard the cashier say, "All right, enough already, leave the store." And while he was doing this, I went to the far back end of the store to remain out of sight, and by the time I circled back to the cashier, I noticed the man was no longer there. The cashier said that he repeatedly and more assertively told the man to leave. He said the man claimed that he didn't understand English. The cashier then pulled a baton that he kept under the counter for protection and held it over his head and asked the man, "Do you understand this?" To which the man finally left the store. I made my purchase but was still worried about walking to my car, even though I was parked in one of the first spaces near the driveway entrance. The cashier pointed at a small TV behind him that had 4 angles of CCTV footage, and he assured me that the man was gone and told me to come back into the store if I saw him again. He also said he would watch as I walked to my car. Even though I would have felt more comfortable if he had walked me to my car, I understood that he was by himself and couldn't leave the store unattended with customers. And after making my purchase, I sped walk to my car, and I always have my keys ready when walking to my car, so I promptly pressed unlock on my car remote, got in, placed my bag of purchases on the passenger seat, and proceeded to start the car. Once my car turned on, I took off the emergency brake, put the car in reverse, and while putting on my seatbelt, I looked in my side view mirror to back out. It was at this point that I saw that same man in the mirror, full-on speed walking right toward my driver's side door. You see, I was driving in a Accord at the time, and that model automatically locks the doors when you take the car out of park. And as soon as I saw him, I hit the gas and violently pulled out of the parking space. I pulled out so fast that it startled him, stopping him dead in his tracks, and he was now standing right next to my driver's side door as I continued to pull out. I gave him the most serious, dead stare I could because I know most predators feed off the fear of their victims. The stare must have worked. As soon as he saw me pulling out while staring at him, he turned his head back toward the driveway entrance and proceeded to walk back to where he had been standing. He had a look of defeat on his face. My face, however, was overcome with relief. I pulled out of the parking lot and took myself back home. And I felt a bit ashamed for being out so late by myself, and I did tell my boyfriend about the incident when he came home at 6 a.m. He also agreed that going out that late alone wasn't the smartest decision, and I'm no longer with that person, but I still live in the same town, though I never leave my home for anything past 9 o'clock anymore. While the town I live in isn't the most dangerous, there are still enough crimes that occur here that it's also not considered the safest. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations.